He walked into that hearing room like a man who had already won. Pete Hegseth, Secretary of Defense, the face of a $25 billion war. And for the first time since that war began, he was sitting inside the United States Congress with no place to hide. April 29, 2026, House Armed Services Committee, Washington, D.C. The hearing was supposed to be about the Pentagon budget, a routine presentation of numbers, a $1.5 trillion defense proposal that would have been the largest in American history. But no one in that room was really there to talk about budget lines. They were there because 60 days earlier, the United States and Israel had launched military strikes against Iran without a single vote from Congress. And the man who had been defending that war on television, in press conferences, and in carefully controlled settings was finally sitting under oath inside a room full of people who had questions. Representative Adam Smith had been waiting. Smith was the ranking Democrat on the committee. Calm, methodical, experienced. He had spent years dissecting military strategy, defense budgets, and foreign policy decisions. He was not the kind of man who raised his voice to make a point. He didn't need to. And on April 29, 2026, he had a question ready. But first, Pete Hegseth opened his mouth. Hegseth came in swinging. Before a single question was asked, he told the committee on the record that the biggest adversary the United States faced was not Iran. It was not a nuclear program. It was not a conventional weapons shield. It was the words of congressional Democrats. Reckless, feckless, and defeatist, he called them. The room stiffened. That was the tone. That was the signal. This was not going to be a cooperative hearing. Republicans leaned back. Democrats leaned forward. And then came the moment that changed everything. During the early portion of questioning, Hegseth made a statement that seemed confident, decisive, even triumphant. He told the committee that Iran's nuclear facilities had been obliterated, destroyed in the 2025 U.S. and Israeli strikes known as Operation Midnight Hammer. Gone. Underground bunkers bombed. Nuclear infrastructure collapsed. The United States was watching the sites, he said, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. He knew where every piece of nuclear material was. He said it like it was settled, like it was a win. Adam Smith heard every word. Whoa, 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 whoa. Smith leaned into the microphone. He wasn't angry. He was precise. And what he said next stopped the room cold. Reclaiming my time for just a second here. We had to start this war, you just said, 60 days ago, because the nuclear weapon was an imminent threat. Now you're saying that it was completely obliterated? Silence. The logic was simple. Devastating. If Iran's nuclear facilities had already been destroyed by Operation Midnight Hammer in 2025, then why did the administration spend months telling Congress, the media, and the American public that Iran's nuclear weapon was an imminent threat? Why did that imminent threat become the justification for launching a new war on February 28, 2026? And if the threat was already obliterated before the first bomb dropped, then what exactly was this war for? Hegseth scrambled. He moved the goalposts. Iran hadn't given up its nuclear ambitions, he said. They had a conventional shield. Thousands of missiles. Their ambitions continued even if their facilities were gone. Smith wasn't finished. So Operation Midnight Hammer accomplished nothing of substance. It left us at exactly the same place we were before. So much so that we had to start a war. Hegseth's answer did not satisfy the room. It didn't satisfy Democrats, and notably, it didn't fully satisfy some Republicans either. But that contradiction wasn't the only thing that landed hard that morning, because something else had already happened. Something the American public had been demanding for weeks. Something the Pentagon had refused to confirm in any public setting. For the first time since the war began, the United States government put an official price tag on it. Jules Hurst, III, the Pentagon's acting comptroller, sat at the witness table alongside Hegseth and General Dan Kane. When the question came about cost, Hurst answered it, $25 billion. That was the number, official, on the record, confirmed inside the House Armed Services Committee on April 29, 2026. Most of that money had gone into munitions, the bombs and missiles used during 2 months of strikes. The rest covered operational costs and logistics. And that figure, Hurst noted, did not yet account for a potential additional request of $200 billion that the Pentagon was considering sending to Congress. $25 billion. No congressional authorization, no vote, no formal declaration of war, and the war was still going. That number hit the room differently than any talking point. But here is what made the next moment so extraordinary, because even after the obliterated nukes, even after the $25 billion, The hearing wasn't close to finished. John Garamendi, Democrat of California, had been listening to all of it. The opening statement, the obliterated facilities, the imminent threat that wasn't imminent anymore, the $25 billion that appeared out of nowhere on a budget sheet. And when his time came, he didn't hold back. Secretary Hegseth, you have been lying to the American public about this war from day one. And so has the president. The room went silent for a different reason now. Garamendi called the war a geopolitical calamity, a strategic blunder, a self-inflicted wound to America. He said the administration had offered ever-changing reasons for the conflict, justifications that shifted so many times that no one in the country could track which version was the official one anymore. Hegseth fired back immediately. Who are you cheering for here? Your hatred for President Trump blinds you to the truth of the success of this mission. 2 men, 1 hearing table. Zero agreement on what this war was actually for, but the confrontation still wasn't over. Because buried inside this hearing, underneath all the fury about Iran, nuclear facilities, and $25 billion, there was a second story, quieter, but just as serious. Representative Chrissy Houlihan of Pennsylvania turned her attention to a name that had appeared in news reports just days before the hearing, General Randy George, the Army's top uniformed officer, deeply respected, she said, by members of the military and members of Congress alike. A man with decades of decorated service. Pete Hegseth had fired him. Houlihan asked why. She asked for a specific reason, a detailed explanation, something, anything, that could justify removing one of the most accomplished military leaders in the country in the middle of an active war. Hegseth's answer was 3 words. We needed new leadership. She pressed. He repeated it. She pressed again. He said it again. 3 words. Each time. No elaboration. No detail. No explanation for why this man, in this moment, had to go. You have no way of explaining why you fired one of the most decorated and remarkable men, Houlihan began. Hegseth cut her off mid-sentence. We needed new leadership. The pattern had been building for weeks before this hearing. Hegseth had removed Admiral Lisa Franchetti, the Navy's top uniformed officer, General Jim Slife, the Air Force's number 2, several others. The explanation was always the same. Warrior ethos, new leadership, no specifics, no accountability. And here, inside a hearing that had already produced a $25 billion admission, a live nuclear contradiction, and a direct accusation of lying to the American public, it was a Republican who finally said what the room had been thinking. Don Bacon of Nebraska, Republican, supporter of the war, and he looked at Hegseth and said this: "It may be constitutionally right to fire these people, but it doesn't make it right or wise." 6 hours. That is how long this hearing lasted. 6 hours of testimony, confrontation, contradiction, and silence. 6 hours during which the American people, for the first time, learned that their government had spent $25 billion on a war that started with a nuclear threat that was, according to the man running the Pentagon, already obliterated before the first bomb dropped. The war with Iran is in its 9th week. A fragile ceasefire is in place. The Strait of Hormuz remains blockaded. Oil prices have surged to a 4-year high. 14 American service members have died. A school in the Iranian city of Manab was struck by U.S. forces in April 2026, killing more than 165 people, including children. That strike, Hegseth told the committee, remains under investigation. The War Powers Resolution gives Congress a threshold, 60 days. After that point, the president is generally required to seek authorization or begin withdrawing forces. Democrats have tried multiple times to pass war powers resolutions. Each time they have failed. But inside that hearing room on April 29, 2026, something shifted. Adam Smith didn't need a vote to make his point. He just needed Hegseth to keep talking. And Hegseth did exactly that. He talked himself straight into a contradiction that 6 hours of testimony could not walk back. We had to start this war, you just said 60 days ago, because the nuclear weapon was an imminent threat. Now you're saying that it was completely obliterated? The Secretary of Defense had no good answer that morning. The $25 billion is real. The 14 dead are real. The obliterated facilities are real. The imminent threat that justified everything, that apparently was already handled, and the room went completely silent.